Maomao would have been perfectly happy to live a quiet life as an apothecary. She imagined sitting on her veranda, sipping tea and doing her medicinal experiments. "I am only a maid," she said. "I simply do the work I am given." Jinshi said HMPH again, apparently finding this answer lackluster. He played somewhat unconsciously with a brush in his hand. He had pushed the snacks to one side of his desk. Perhaps he wasn't interested in them. Maomao thought he looked uncommonly youthful. "How about this then?" he said. He called Gaoshan over with a grin and whispered something in his ear. Whatever he said, Gaoshan was clearly not enthusiastic about it. "Master Jinshi," he said, "you heard me. Get everything ready, please." Gaoshan nodded without conviction. Meanwhile, Jinshi dunked the brush he was playing with in some ink, then began writing on a piece of paper in fluid, flowing motions. "When I was visiting the trading merchants the other day, I heard about a very interesting item. I believe this was the name." He pulled up the paper with a flourish and showed it to Maomao. Her eyes immediately began to sparkle. Written on the paper were 2 characters, Niu Huang. "This is Calculus bovis." "Ox Bezor, would you like it?" "I would." Almost before she knew what she was doing, Maomao rushed up to and then onto Jinshi's desk. Calculus bovis was a medicine, a gallstone from a cow or ox. Supposedly, only 1 in 1,000 cattle produced one. It was considered among the rarest and most valuable medicinal supplements. A poor apothecary from the pleasure district would be lucky to see one in her lifetime. It was a mouth-watering prospect. And this eunuch was saying what? Would he actually give her one, really and truly? Jinshi drew back slightly from Maomao, who had begun to lean closer and closer to him. She did not realize what she was doing until Gaoshan tugged on her sleeve, bringing her back to reality. She slowly climbed down off the desk and straightened her skirt. "There is that motivation. Can I really have it?" Maomao gave Jinshi a cautious look, but he now appeared somewhat more adult than before. Maomao recognized this as the alluring gaze he frequently turned on maidservants in the rear palace. He said, "That depends on how hard you work." Then Jinshi began wadding up the paper and threw it into the trash basket. He had a familiar honeyed smile on his face. Maomao did not care about the smile, but he was offering her a reward with something she desperately wanted if she did good work, and that was all she needed to know. "Understood. You need only tell me what you wish, Master Jinshi." Then Maomao cleared away the teacup and the untouched snacks. Chapter 12, The Ritual as Instructed. Maomao shut herself up in the archives the very next afternoon. The building held many public records and smelled distinctly musty. A pale-faced official brought Maomao armloads of scrolls. He was the only other person she saw there. The posting seemed to be a rather easy job. It wouldn't hurt him to get out in the sun every once in a while, she thought. She unrolled one scroll after another. Each scroll was made of excellent paper. They briefly listed both accidents and crimes that had occurred in the palace complex over the past several years. This information wasn't confidential. The scrolls were quite public and could be viewed by anyone who requested them. She looked through them with interest. Many of the cases were ordinary accidents, but a few sparked her curiosity. Cases of food poisoning, for example. She had expected such cases to increase during the summer, but there were a surprising number in winter too. Autumn could bring its own problems, with people eating mushrooms that were unidentified or inappropriate. Maomao asked the official for another bundle of scrolls. She had expected him to treat her as a nuisance, but he seemed quite pleased to finally have an opportunity to do some work. It looked like he wasn't here just because he liked to kill time. He was clearly curious about what Maomao was researching, and occasionally stole little glances as she worked. Maomao ignored him, flipping through the sheets until she found what she wanted. It was a description of the recent food poisoning incident. Maomao stopped when she saw the government organ with which the victim had been associated. The Board of Rights. That, at least, was what his official title suggested to her. Maomao's recollection, such as it was that the Board of Rights was responsible for education. It was also responsible for diplomacy. Perhaps she would be more sure if she had studied harder for the court lady's exam, she thought. Having trouble with anything, the pallid official asked her. Perhaps it was simply to pass the time. Maomao decided that now was not the time to be embarrassed by her ignorance. "Yes," she said, "I'm not quite sure what this title signifies." She suspected the admission made her sound absolutely brainless. Ah, this person oversees the observance of ritual, the man said, sounding rather pleased to be providing this knowledge. Did you say ritual? Right, the food poisoning victim had been in charge of ritual implements, hadn't he? Indeed. I would be happy to fetch a more detailed book on the subject for you if you like, the official said. He did not sound unkind. Maomao hardly heard him though. The gears were spinning in her brain. Suddenly she smacked the long table in front of her. The man nearly jumped out of his skin. Do you have something to write on? Maomao demanded. Yes. Maomao quickly reviewed the register of incidents she had been examining. She noted exact positions and terms of office. When coincidence piled upon coincidence, it suggested something deliberate, and if she laid out all these seeming coincidences, the place where they overlapped would tell her where to look. Observance of ritual. Ritual implements. Rituals themselves were not uncommon. All manner of rites were observed throughout the year. A village chief could perform the keeping of minor observances. However, the most important ceremonies were performed by the imperial family. The implements that had been stolen would have been for at least a mid-level ceremony. Perhaps they were for something even more important. A mid-level ceremony, Maomao thought to herself. She remembered Jinshi performing a purification rite. If she had a question about rituals, asking the eunuch might be quickest. Are you interested in ritual matters? The official, who was proving to be both bored and quite friendly, came over with a large drawing. Maomao said. It was a fairly detailed illustration of the ritual grounds. An altar stood in the center, and a banner was fluttering above it. A large pot was placed at the foot of the altar, perhaps to hold a fire. Rather unusual place, isn't it? The official said. So it is. It certainly looked elegant and imposing. The banner had some kind of writing on it. Did they change it each time there was an observance? It seemed like a lot of trouble to take it up and down every time, Maomao thought. She was ever practical. The banner was high enough that even getting a ladder up to it would be a headache. They have a special contraption there, the official said. A large beam hung from the ceiling. It could be raised and lowered. This allowed them to write the appropriate ritual inscription on the banner. You seem to know quite a bit about this, Maomao said, studying the pale man. I dare say I do. I once did more dignified work than marking time in the archives. I am ashamed to admit I must have slipped up at the wrong moment or offended the wrong person, and I earned Excel to the stacks. He had formerly been assigned to the Board of Rites himself. Maomao realized this explained why he had been so interested in what she was doing. And then the official said something that really got her attention. He said, I was concerned whether it would be strong enough at first. I am so glad there haven't been any problems. You were concerned whether what would be strong enough. The beam. The system that holds it up. That is a huge thing. I hardly dare imagine the tragedy that would result if it fell. But no sooner had I raised the issue than I found myself banished to these archives. Maomao stared at the picture in silence. If the beam came loose from the ceiling, the person in greatest danger would be the officiant of the ceremony. A very important person indeed. Maomao thought about how worried he was regarding the system's strength. To raise or lower the beam, it had to be attached to something. If the fasteners were to break, how strong was it? There was a fire pot nearby. Maomao was suddenly struck by the question of what ritual implements had been stolen. She slapped the table again, startling the official. She turned to him, who stood stiff as a board, and said, I'm sorry, but when is the next ritual observance? And where is the place shown in this picture? It is a structure called the Altar of the Sapphire Sky, on the western edge of the outer court. And regarding when it will be used, the official flipped through a calendar and scratched his ear. He said there was an observance today. Before the man had finished speaking, Maomao was dashing out of the building, not even bothering to straighten the scrolls. The Altar of the Sapphire Sky is to the west, she thought, trying to organize her thoughts as she ran. She suspected this plan had been developing for quite a while. It was prepared with the understanding that some parts might fail. However, if even a few parts could overlap, it would create the opening the plotter desired. I am still just guessing. It is nothing more than that, but it was dizzying to imagine the consequences if her guess was right. Soon she spied a round pagoda. Similar buildings flanked it on either side. There was a row of officials in front of it. From their clothing she guessed a ritual was happening even now. "Hey you," one of them called. "What do you think you are doing?" That was only to be expected when a filthy maid tried to race past them. Maomao gave a cluck of her tongue. She did not have time for this. If she could have gone for Jinshi or Gaeshun, they might have solved the problem for her. However, they were going to be out all day. "Let me through, please," she said. "Absolutely not. A ritual is being celebrated," said a warrior holding a nasty-looking war club. He glowered at Maomao, but she could hardly blame him for wanting to do his job. She cursed herself for not being a smooth talker. "It is an emergency. You have to let me inside. A maid like you would dare impose herself on the holy rites." He had her there. Maomao was simply a maid. She held no authority. If this man allowed a girl like her into the ceremonial venue just because she asked, he might as well risk his position. Unfortunately, Maomao could not back down either. Perhaps nothing would happen, she thought. But if it did, it would be too late for "I told you so's." By the time we realize something irrevocable has happened, it is always already too late. The soldier stood head and shoulders taller than her, but she looked him full in the face. The officials nearby were beginning to murmur and look at them. Maomao said, "I am not here simply to besmirch the ritual. Someone's life is in danger. You have to stop the ceremony." One of the nearby officials spoke up. "That is not for you to decide. If you have an opinion you would like to share, we have a suggestion box." He was openly mocking Maomao as she was a lowly servant. You would never see it in time. "Let me through." No, they were never going to get anywhere arguing like children. It would perhaps have been mature for Maomao to acknowledge she was never going to get through and simply back down, but she didn't have it in her. Instead, a sarcastic smile worked its way across her face. "There is a fatal flaw in the construction of that altar. And I believe someone has taken advantage of the situation. If you do not let me through this minute, believe me, you will regret it. Dear me, I tremble to think what will happen to you when they find out I warned you and you did not listen." She put her hand to her cheek in an exaggerated expression of surprise. Then she said, "Wait, I see. Is that what is going on here?" She smacked her fist into her open palm as if it all made sense now. Her smile turned mean. "You want whatever it is to happen. You are delaying me here because you are in league with whoever booby-trapped." She was interrupted by a dull thud from her own head. She was lying on the ground almost before she knew what had happened, and her vision was blurring. She thought she had to stay conscious, but wishing wasn't going to make it so. She heard the voice of the soldier who had struck her, but he sounded as if he were a great distance away. She couldn't make out what he was saying. At least she knew she had their attention. Any soldier would be angry about abuse like that from a little girl. They might be angry enough to raise a hand without thinking. She couldn't complain because she had brought it on herself, but if she passed out now, it would all be over. Slowly, Maomao pulled herself to a sitting position. Her ear burned and her vision was still blurry. As colour filtered back into her world, she perceived the soldier. His arm was still raised and his companions were restraining him. She thought starting a fight might help, but it was no good. There hadn't been enough of a commotion to interrupt the ceremony. She could still hear music coming from the direction of the altar. The show was going on. At last she dragged her body onto its feet. A few red specks stippled the ground in front of her. It was a nosebleed, she thought, not something to worry about. The blow seemed to have caught her on the ear, but it only burned. There was no pain. Maomao pressed a thumb to one side of her nose and blew out the blood. A murmur ran through the assembled officials. Maomao realized it was perhaps inappropriate to shed blood at the sight of a ritual. She hardly had time to apologize. "Are you quite satisfied?" she said. Her vision was still fuzzy, so she couldn't see the exact response she received. She only heard a general buzz of voices around her. There wasn't time for these games. Maomao had something she had to do. Her voice went up an octave. "Let me through." She had to get in there. It would be too late once everything was over. It was too late. If she did not get in there right now, she would never get her ox bezoar. Her head was spinning and her vision was still hazy, but that thought gave her the motivation to stay standing. Maomao looked hard at those around her. "I am not asking you to stop the ceremony. I only want to pass through. You could say a rat snuck in while you weren't looking. The current emperor was a compassionate man. She did not think anyone's head would roll for this, except possibly hers. She could only beg Jinchi to intercede on her behalf, or at the very least to let her die by poison. She asked him what would happen if something did occur while she was detained. She knew someone important was celebrating the ritual inside. Then you will pay with your lives. She did not know who was officiating, only that everything about the situation implied it was someone highly ranked indeed. A few of the guards looked at each other as if shaken by her words, but it was clear they were not all about to step aside. Why should we listen to a nobody little girl like you? The soldier asked. That was the real question, wasn't it? Maomao had no answer, but she only stood staring at the man. Then they heard the swift clack of shoes. Someone said, "Perhaps you would listen to me." The tone was almost joking. Maomao could practically hear the smile in the voice. She knew to whom it belonged. The soldier blocking Maomao's way took half a step back. The assembled officials had gone pale, as if they had been confronted with something they had hoped never to see. Maomao did not look behind her. She did her best to keep her scowl from getting any deeper. Her temples were already starting to twitch. Anyhow, nobody, little girl or not, I'm not sure I can condone hitting a young woman. Look, she is injured. Who did it? Fess up. A cold edge entered her voice. Everyone looked unconsciously at the man with the war club. His face became tight. The voice continued to begin, "Why don't you do as the girl says? I will take full responsibility for whatever happens." Whoever was behind her had excellent timing. Maomao gritted her teeth. She thought she could not think about that now. She still did not look back. Instead, she cast one final glance at the people around her, and then she ran for the altar. She decided she did not care who the voice belonged to. The aromas of smoke and incense drifted through the arena. The sound of musical instruments played alongside the flapping of a banner. The banner hung from the ceiling beam. A prayer from the celebrants was written on it in flowing, beautiful letters. It was displayed high above, hoping to reach heaven. The arrival of a grimy young girl in this sacred space caused the crowd to murmur. I must look awful, Maomao thought. She had dirtied her uniform while running, and now her face was streaked with dried blood from her nose. She was determined to have a nice, long bath when this was all over. However, she would not be caught dead using the bath in Jinchi's residence. Perhaps she could persuade Gaoshun to let her use his. That is, if her head was still attached to her body by then. At the far end of a scarlet carpet, a man in black stood waiting. He wore a distinctive cap of office. It was hung with pendants of beads. He was intoning something in a loud and clear voice. A huge fire pot stood in front of him, burning brightly. Above his head was a beam. A flapping banner hung from the beam. Securing the beam to the ceiling, Maomao thought she heard a distinct creaking sound. It had to be her imagination. There was no way she could have heard it at this distance. Nonetheless, she kept moving. She could feel the soft material of the carpet under her feet. She drove toward him as fast as she could. The officiant noticed Maomao and turned. She did not pay that any mind, but she flung herself against him. She wrapped her arms around his stomach and pulled him to the ground. At almost the same instant, there was an ear-splitting crash. A hot, sharp sensation shot up her leg. She looked back to discover a large metal beam pinning her leg. The cut had broken the skin. She thought it would need stitches. She reached for the folds of her robe. She always carried medicine and simple medical supplies there, but a large hand caught hers and held it still. She looked up and her vision was filled with the beads dangling from the hat. Somewhere beyond them floated a pair of eyes as dark as obsidian. And how do we find ourselves like this? The voice sounded almost celestial. The beam that had fallen from the ceiling lay on the ground. If the owner of the voice had been standing directly under it when it came down, he certainly would have been killed instantly. Master Jinchi. May I have my bezoar now? Maomao asked the gorgeous eunuch, who she now discovered was also the officiant at this ceremony. But she wondered why he was here at all. A fine thing to think of at a moment like this, Jinchi said. His face puckered as if he had bitten into something sour. His large hand brushed Maomao's face. The pad of his thumb traced her cheek. Look at your face, he winced. Why did he do that? Maomao was more interested in fixing the problem at hand or foot. Would you let me stitch my leg up? It didn't hurt so much as it burned. She twisted to try to get a look at the wound. Her body shuddered instead. Hey now, Jinchi's voice sounded far away. Oh, she thought it was that whack on the head. Her strength abruptly left her. Her vision greyed out again. Then Jinchi was shaking her, shouting something. She could not tell what he was saying, but she wished he would be quiet. Chapter 13 Thornapple. It felt pleasant, as if her body was rocking gently. A faint smell of fine incense tickled her nose. The swaying motion made her feel like a child in a cradle. After a moment the swaying stopped, and she felt she was being laid down on something soft. Then time passed, though she didn't know how much time had gone by. Where am I?